My name is Elise Turner, and I am 34 years old. Until recently, I believed my life was stable, if not perfect. But stability is an illusion, and illusions shatter. Mine did the day my parents died. Their sudden passing left me with an empty heart and a house filled with memories I had hoped would bring me comfort. Instead, that house became the battleground for a betrayal I never saw coming. At first, my husband, Peter, was supportive. He held me as I cried, whispered reassurances, and promised that we would get through this together. But the warmth in his voice soon faded, replaced by something colder, something calculating. It started with small things, his mother, Lorraine, visiting too often, making herself at home in my parents' kitchen as if she belonged there. Then came the comments. "This house is too big for just you, Elise. You need family around you. You should be grateful Peter and I are here to help you adjust." I ignored the unease creeping up my spine. I wanted to believe their presence was temporary. I wanted to believe that my husband, the man I had trusted, would never turn against me. I was wrong. The night everything changed, I overheard them whispering in the living room. I wasn't meant to hear it, but fate, or perhaps something darker, wanted me to. "If she tries to stop us from moving in, divorce her." Lorraine's voice was sharp, unyielding. And Peter, he didn't argue. He didn't even hesitate. "She won't," he replied. "She's too weak." I stood frozen in the hallway, my breath caught in my throat. Weak? That word burned more than the betrayal itself. They thought I would break, that I would surrender. They were wrong. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while Peter slept beside me, blissfully unaware that his world was about to collapse. I would not fight with words. I would not beg for respect in my own home. I had a plan. And in the morning, they would see just how weak I really was. I woke before dawn, the weight of betrayal pressing against my chest, but I refused to let it suffocate me. If last night had taught me anything, it was that I had been too trusting for too long. That ended now. I glanced at Peter sleeping soundly beside me, his breathing slow and steady, completely unaware that by the time the sun set, his life would never be the same. Slipping out of bed, I moved through the house in silence, my fingers brushing against the walls that had once made me feel safe. My parents had built this home with love, filling every corner with warmth. And now, Peter and Lorraine thought they could waltz in and take it from me. Not a chance. By the time the first rays of sunlight streamed through the windows, I was ready. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, waiting. The first one to wake was Lorraine. She entered the kitchen with the smugness of a queen surveying her kingdom. "Good morning," she said, opening the fridge as if she owned it. "I was thinking we should start rearranging some of the furniture today. This house needs a woman's touch." I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips. "Oh, I completely agree." She turned, narrowing her eyes at my tone. "Finally, you're coming to your senses." Before I could respond, Peter walked in, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He paused when he saw me sitting there, a look of quiet determination on my face. Something about it made him hesitate. "Elise?" he asked. I took a deep breath, then reached into the folder on the table and slid a stack of papers toward him. "What's this?" he asked, flipping through them. Lorraine moved closer, peering over his shoulder. The moment her eyes landed on the bold title at the top, her face paled. "Official eviction notice." "What the hell is this?" Peter's voice was sharp now, all traces of sleep gone. I leaned back, my fingers wrapped around my coffee mug. "It's exactly what it looks like. You and your mother have exactly 48 hours to vacate my house." Lorraine let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You can't be serious." "Peter, tell her she can't do this. But Peter was still flipping through the documents, his face growing grimmer with each page. She can. His voice was hollow. The house is legally hers. We have no claim. Lorraine's face twisted with rage. After everything we've done for you, Elise. After everything Peter has given you. I let out a short, humorless laugh. What Peter has given me? You mean betrayal? Lies? An ultimatum disguised as loyalty. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I heard you last night, Lorraine. I heard everything. Peter's head snapped up, his mouth opening, but I held up a hand. Save it. You thought I'd be too weak to fight back. That was your first mistake. Lorraine's expression turned desperate. You can't do this. Where will we go? I met her gaze without flinching. That's not my problem. You gave me a choice last night, remember? Accept you here or lose my marriage. Well, I've made my decision. I picked up the second set of papers and dropped them on the table. Divorce papers. Signed. Ready. Peter sucked in a breath, his hands shaking. Lorraine looked at him, waiting for him to fight, but he just stared at the papers. Elise, you don't have to do this. His voice was quiet now, almost pleading. I tilted my head. Oh, but I do. And you have 48 hours to get out. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving them to stare at the ruins of the life they thought they controlled. And for the first time in months, I felt free. Peter didn't leave. Not immediately. For the first few hours after I handed Peter the eviction and divorce papers, he and Lorraine sat in stunned silence. I almost expected them to start packing. But when I came downstairs later that afternoon, they were still there. Peter was sitting on the couch, his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. Lorraine, on the other hand, was pacing furiously, her lips pressed into a thin line. The moment she saw me, her eyes flashed with something dangerous. You think this is over, Elise? Her voice was sharp, cutting through the tense air. You think you can just throw us out like garbage? I crossed my arms, refusing to let her see any hesitation. No, Lorraine. I know I can. Peter finally looked up, his expression unreadable. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. The only mistake I made was trusting you, I shot back. You were willing to throw me away the second I stopped being convenient. Now I'm returning the favor. Lorraine let out a bitter laugh. You stupid, ungrateful girl. She turned to Peter. Tell her. Tell her what you did. A chill ran down my spine. What is she talking about? Peter didn't answer immediately. Instead, he exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples like he had a headache. I took out a loan. His voice was quiet, but the words hit me like a slap. My stomach dropped. A loan? What kind of loan? Lorraine folded her arms. Oh, not just any loan, dear. A loan against this house. The room spun. That's impossible. My voice barely came out. This house was never in your name. You couldn't have. I forged your signature, Peter admitted, his gaze dark and unreadable. Months ago. I needed the money, and the bank approved it. My hands trembled as I reached for the edge of the dining table, gripping it to steady myself. How much? A lot. Lorraine smirked. And if you think throwing us out solves your problem, think again. That debt is in your name now. Panic clawed at my chest, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't break, not now. Instead, I took a slow breath and forced myself to think. You stole from me, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You put my house at risk. And you thought I wouldn't find out. Peter ran a hand down his face, looking exhausted. I was going to fix it, Elise. Fix it? My voice finally cracked. With what money, Peter? You don't have anything. That's why you did this, isn't it? You were desperate, and you thought I'd just let it happen. Lorraine gave me a condescending smile. And you will let it happen, dear. Because if you go to the police, you'll be drowning in legal fees, and the house will still be repossessed before anything is settled. I stared at them, my heart pounding. I had thought throwing them out would be the end of it. I had been wrong. You have 48 hours, I said, my voice like steel. And I will find a way to undo whatever you've done. Count on it. Then, before they could say another word, I turned and walked away, my mind already racing. This wasn't over. Not even close. I barely slept that night. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I replayed Peter's confession over and over again. He had forged my signature. He had stolen from me. And now, thanks to him, my parents' house, the last piece of them I had left, was at risk. But I wasn't going to let him win. By sunrise, I had a plan. I drove straight to Mr. Patterson's office as soon as his firm opened. He had been my parents' lawyer for years, handling everything from their wills to property matters. If anyone could help me, it was him. He listened carefully as I explained everything, Peter's deception, the fraudulent loan, the eviction notice. When I was finished, he sighed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Forgery is a crime, Elise. If we prove this, Peter could be facing serious charges. Good, I said coldly. But my main concern is the house. How do I get the loan off my name? He leaned back in his chair. That depends. If we can prove the bank didn't verify the documents properly, we may be able to challenge it. But if Peter used someone on the inside to push it through. I swallowed hard. Then what? Then it'll be harder. But not impossible. He gave me a reassuring look. We'll start by pulling every document related to this loan. There might be loopholes we can use. And in the meantime, he hesitated, then said, do you want to file fraud charges against Peter? I hesitated. Not because I wanted to protect him, but because I knew Peter. If I pushed him into a corner too soon, he might lash out. Not yet, I said. But be ready. I left the lawyer's office with a renewed sense of purpose. If Peter had forged my signature, the bank had either been sloppy or complicit. Either way, they had answers. I arrived at Brentwood Savings and Loan just after 10 a.m., stepping into the sleek, glass-walled building with determination burning in my veins. I went straight to the manager, Mr. Reynolds, and demanded to see the loan paperwork. He hesitated at first, but when I mentioned legal action, his tone changed. A few minutes later, I sat across from him, staring at a file with my supposed signature at the bottom of the loan agreement. It looked perfect. Identical to my real signature. But it wasn't mine. You didn't verify this properly, I said, my voice dangerously low. Mr. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Turner, we follow strict procedures. If the paperwork was approved. Then someone here approved a fraudulent loan, I interrupted. And if you don't cooperate, I'll make sure your bank is investigated for fraud, too. That got his attention. He hesitated, then said, I'll see what I can find out. As I left, my phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Patterson. Found something. Come back ASAP. Back at Mr. Patterson's office, he slid a document across the desk, his expression triumphant. You're going to love this. I picked it up, scanning the page as my pulse quickened. It was a transfer record. A large sum of money had been wired from Peter's account to someone named Marcus Levine, a name I didn't recognize. "Who is this?" I asked. Mr. Patterson leaned back, smirking. "A former loan officer at Brentwood Savings. Fired last month for unethical banking practices." My stomach twisted. Peter had bribed someone inside the bank. "This proves he knew exactly what he was doing," I murmured, gripping the document tighter. Mr. Patterson nodded. "And it gives us leverage. If the loan was processed illegally, we can challenge it. It strengthens our case." For the first time in days, a spark of hope flared in my chest. Peter thought he had me trapped. He had no idea what was coming. I returned home with a steady pulse and sharper focus. Peter and Lorraine were huddled in the living room, whispering. They fell silent the moment I walked in. "Enjoying your last day in my house?" I asked, my voice dripping with false sweetness. Lorraine scoffed. "You think you've won?" I smiled, slow and deliberate. "Oh, I know I have." I tossed a copy of the fraud report onto the coffee table. Brentwood Savings is investigating one of their former loan officers. Turns out, he had financial ties to Peter. Peter's face drained of color. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued, stepping closer. "You're going to call the bank and tell them the truth. Admit you forged my signature. If you do, they might work with us to cancel the loan. If not..." I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. "I press one button, and the police will be here in minutes." Lorraine's lips curled in fury. "She's bluffing," she snapped. "Peter, don't be stupid." I tilted my head, holding up my phone. "Want to test that theory?" Silence. Peter swallowed hard, his hands shaking. His gaze darted between me and the report, realization sinking in. Finally, he grabbed his phone and started dialing. I need to report a forgery," he muttered into the receiver. That was it. The moment everything shifted. The next few days were a blur of legal action. With Peter's confession, the bank froze the loan and launched an internal investigation. The fraudulent documents were voided, which meant my house was safe. Peter, on the other hand, wasn't. Mr. Patterson moved swiftly, filing fraud charges against him. I had debated whether I wanted to go that far, but the more I thought about it, the lies, the betrayal, the sheer audacity of what he had done, I knew he had to face the consequences. Within a week, Peter was arrested. But Lorraine wasn't done. The morning after his arrest, I found her still in the house, sitting in my mother's old chair as if she owned it. "You think you've won?" she spat the moment she saw me. I met her glare with unwavering calm. "I don't think, Lorraine." "I know." She shot up from the chair, her eyes blazing. "I gave my son everything. I sacrificed for him. And you," she jabbed a finger at me, "you ruined him." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "No, Lorraine. Peter ruined himself. He made his choices. And you? You let him." She scoffed. "You're just like your mother. Weak." A slow smile spread across my face. "If I were weak, you'd still be living in my house." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. "Get out," I said, my voice steady. She opened her mouth as if to argue, then slumped. Without another word, she turned and marched toward the door, her heels clicking against the floor. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. She was already gone. The house was finally mine again. For the first time in months, I felt safe. Free. I walked through the halls, trailing my fingers along the walls, feeling the echoes of my parents in every room. I had almost lost everything. But I had fought back. And I had won. Standing in the doorway, sunlight streaming in, I took a deep breath and smiled. This was my home. And no one would ever take it from me again.